Hey everyone, this is the third video of Basis Excel series taught by Professor York. These videos are brought to you by Afaf Borjawi and Daniel Levy. Today we're going to go over a very important Excel formula, the Vlookup. In this video we're going to go over the Vlookup syntax, basically how to write a Vlookup, how to lock values in formulas, and a Vlookup limitation that you have to keep in mind while using the Vlookup. So let's begin. Open up your workbook and try to work along with me. So we're going to start with problem number 1. So in this problem it says use a Vlookup to populate telephone number and email address. So over here in this table in columns K through M we have name and 2 blank columns. We have telephone number and email address. And this is a very common problem you're going to face while using Excel. You're going to need to populate values based off a lookup value. And a lookup value is basically the information that you have that you're going to use to look up another value. So let's just jump in directly to the formula, and I'll explain exactly all the parts to it. So you hit equals and type Vlookup, and you can double click or hit tab now and it'll fill in the rest. And so the first thing Excel wants to know is what is the lookup value that you're using to look up the information you need. So in this case, 2 points of information that we have on both tables is we have the name here and we have the name over here in this table. As a result, we're going to use the name to look up any values to the right of the lookup value. So we're going to use the name to look up anything like the street address, city, state, zip code, country, email address, username, or telephone number. So let's begin. So first step is we're going to choose the lookup value. Here we're going to choose Joe Walter. We're then going to hit comma, and it's going to ask us for our table array. The table array is the table from where you're extracting data from. So in this situation, the tables are right next to each other, but most of the time the tables will be in different workbooks. So what you're going to do for the table array is you're just going to select the table from where you're taking from underneath the titles of each column. So you choose this table array and then you hit comma. And the column index is the column within the table array. So if your table array, let's say, is starting from, let's say you're using zip code, if your table array was this big, it would be however many columns are in here. So let's say you were looking up username with zip code, the column array for username would be 1, 2, 3, 4. In this case, we're using the entire table, so our column index is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So it's the 9th column in this table array. So we type in 9, and then this one is going to be the range lookup. It's basically there's 2 options. For the sake of this lesson, you're only going to use false or an exact match. In the event that your values are organized by alphanumerically, you could sometimes use true. There are really specific situations that you'd use true. Most of the time you'd use false, so either double click on false or type in 0, which gives you false. And now you have your lookup formula completed. So you hit enter, and now as you can see, we have Joe Walter's phone number taken from this table and put over here. Now, we're going to go over a couple of things. One thing is, if I want to drag down this, so I want to have everyone's phone number, and I drag this formula down, there's going to be an issue. Actually, in this case, there's not going to be an issue, but in the next one, there will be. So before we go into locking values, let me just fill in the next one, just to give you one more example. So equals Vlookup. We're going to choose up our lookup value. Again, it's going to be the name. You could also, if you really wanted to, use a different lookup value if you had more than one. So you could, if you had zip code and you wanted to look up email address, you could do that. You can't use the telephone number to look up the username, to look up the email address, and I'll explain more about that later. But in this case, just use name. So you choose your lookup value. You choose your table array again, and you're going to choose that. And you choose your column index number. In this case, we're looking up email address, so that would be 787. So we're going to choose 7. And again, you're going to choose false, so it's an exact match, just like we spoke about. And you could choose 0 or false. And you're going to hit enter, and when you drag it down, you'll notice everything fills in. Now we're going to come about to a important lesson. This is locking your value, and this is an imperative step when you get into charts that aren't organized. As you can see in this situation, the names are in the same order in this table as they are in this table. So when I drag down the formula, you won't really have any issues of the table array when it moves down. So what does that mean? So let me give you a quick side lesson over here. So locking values is an extremely important thing in Excel. And the reason is it allows you to say, don't move the table that you selected. So what does that mean? Let me give you an example. So I'm going to do a basic sum function, which is basically an addition function. And I'm going to do that with this example over here. So there's two ways you could lock values, the columns or the rows. So let me give you an example of what that means and how you could use that. So let me do equals sum, and I'm going to choose this entire table array. So this is a table array now. And you can see it's over here. It selects just the numbers in this area. So you're going to close that, and you hit enter, and you see you have 30. Now I'm going to drag this over one. And when I drag it over, you see it's 15. And why? Because when I dragged it over, Excel knows that when you drag a formula over, it's going to drag over the whatever you put in is the table array or lookup value or any cell you selected. It's going to move it over in the direction that you chose. So in this case, it moved it over to the right, and you can see now it's only highlighting these values. Now let me show you what happens if I move it down. So we're going to go to 30 and I move it down. Again, it did the same thing. It moved the whole table array down. So what do we do to prevent this? So the letter over here is your column. You see these letters up here? That's your columns. Those are called columns. So we use a $sign to say, don't change these when you move over to the right or left. So I hit enter, and now when I move it over, it's still 30. But if I drag it down, it moves it down. You see that? It moves it down one. And that's the rows. So in order to prevent it from moving down, you have to lock your rows, which is the number. So before the number, you put a $sign. You hit enter. And now if I copy down this formula, it won't move down. So now this value is locked. It doesn't matter if I move it to the right, if I move it down, it doesn't matter. It's always going to add up that table array's value without moving the table array in any direction, no matter how much I move it over. And this is important if you're doing a lot of Vlookup formulas using the same table array, and I'll explain that here. So let me give you the example of how to use it in a Vlookup. So let's do a Vlookup. We're going to look up the username based off the name. So we're going to do our Vlookup formula. We're going to choose our lookup value, and we're going to choose our table array. Same thing. We're going to choose our column index number. In this case, it's going to be 8. And we're going to choose the false value to give us an exact match, and hit enter, and you can see we get the value. But when we drag it down, you'll notice a lot of the values are missing. Why? Well, I'll show you. If I hit F2 on this one, on Janet Hammond, you'll notice that the table array moved down to here, and it's now taking values from here. Obviously, there's not going to be a match because Janet Hammond is over here. So what do we do to prevent this? Well, let's go back to our original formula and lock the values correctly. So first things first, we want the lookup value to drag down as we drag down the formula. That's how it knows that we want to look up Jerry Betty's username when we drag it down. You see it drags down every time. But we don't want our table array to move because that's where we're getting our data from. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into here, and we're going to lock both the columns and the rows. So we're going to put a $sign before the letter and the number, and again over here before the letter and the number, and we're going to hit enter. And now you'll notice when I drag down, it has all the values, and you can see no matter how far down I drag it, the table array stays in the same place. Now, let me just do another example of how to look up values. If let's say we want to look up values that are right next to each other. So you see username and telephone are right next to each other. If I were to drag this over, the table array will stay in the same place. Oops. The table array will stay in the same place, but the lookup value moved over. So what can we do to prevent this? Well, we know that we can lock values in either up or down, or left or right directions. And left or right is locking the columns. So if we lock just the column, So it will stay in column K no matter how far to the left or right we drag it. Hit enter. When I drag it over, Excel knows now that you want to keep the lookup value in column K. However, because we only lock the columns and not the rows, when we drag it down, it knows that your lookup value is going to drag down as you drag down your formula. Very important steps in Excel, and you could miss a lot of data if you don't properly lock your values, or if you overlock your values, you can have a lot of duplicates or just have wrong values completely, just the same value overlapping. And let me just give you a quick example of what that would look like. If I, let's say, locked both the, let's do it on this one, if I lock both my, for my lookup value, both my columns and rows, Excel would never know to move down my lookup value. So it would know to move with each time I drag the formula down to move the value I'm looking up down with it. So if I drag this down, oops, if I drag this down by double clicking that little box, it just thinks to always look at Tracy Brown. You can see that every formula is Tracy Brown. But when I remove it, you'll see when I remove the locking value on the row, you'll see that you can now drag down the value by double clicking the box, and you'll see it now knows to drag down this way, but it will never drag this direction because we locked the column. So the last thing we're going to go through is a limitation. Oh, I forgot to mention something that I just realized. I forgot to actually change the column index number. That would have been silly. You have to change, when you drag down the formula to the right, you have to change the column index number for it to actually change the column that it's taking the information from. In this case, I forgot to change it, so it was just taking the username in both situations. When I drag the formula over, one important step that you have to do, even if your values are all locked properly, you have to remind Excel what information you want to take. In this case, I want to take telephone number, so that's the eighth column. So you change that to an 8. To a 9, my bad, this is the 9th column, so you change the column index number to a 9, and now it'll know to take the telephone number. Sorry about that. Alright, let's move on, and I'm going to show you one of the biggest limitations with Vlookup, and that is you can only look up values from left to right. You can't look up values to the left of the lookup value. What does that mean? It sounds a bit complicated. It's very simple. If I have, let's say, only the zip code, which you generally won't have, but sometimes you come across a situation where you need to look up stuff like based on weird values. So you have your zip code, which is not a good value to normally have because if the same thing's twice, you get confusing. Anyways, you have your zip code and you want to look up the name. All right, simple. You just type in Vlookup. You use the zip code as your lookup value. You choose your table array, which you could choose, by the way, for this table array if you want to keep the less columns if you have a lot of columns, but we're just going to do the same thing we've been doing. That's our table array. We're going to lock it by hitting F4, just a shortcut to lock columns and rows, comma, and well, the column that the name is on is column 1, so we're going to write 1, choose false, and the issue is it's not coming up with anything, and it doesn't come up with anything as you drag it down. No matter what, it doesn't matter because the name is on the left side of your lookup value. You cannot look from right to left. Excel doesn't know what to do. It always starts here and goes right. That's just how Excel works. But let's do an example over here just to prove that I'm not making this up. If I want to do Vlookup, or you know what? Yeah, I'll just redo it. If I want to do a Vlookup, I'm going to choose my lookup value as zip code again. I'm going to choose my table array. Important step, I'm going to lock my table array. I'm going to do comma. By hitting F4, I'm going to do comma, and I'm going to choose my column index. Well, the username is on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So it's the 8th column. And our name range, we're going to choose exact match, close the brackets. Oops, what did I forget here? Did I do something wrong? Let me try rewriting that really fast. I don't know what I did wrong here, but let's try again. Let's do a Vlookup. Choose our lookup value. We're going to choose our table array. Oh, I know what I did wrong. you have to start your table array from the value you're looking up. So we're going to choose our table array from the zip code, and we're going to choose the column index. So remember, I said your column index is based inside your table array. So in this case, you're going to do 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's the fourth column, and you're going to want an exact match. Hit enter, and that's strange. Oh, I know what's wrong. No, it's not about locking it. It's just that the Excel took the format of this one. So funny story. The Excel decided to change. I don't know what it did to the first zip code, but it doesn't understand. It must be put in a weird. Let me try that. Huh, it's very strange. Try putting it as a number. Still doesn't know. All right, well, we're going to ignore that for now just so I can get the basic lesson going. And let me just see if that was wrong as well. By the way, I didn't lock my values. I know. I'm going to do that now. Okay, yeah, I was right. All right, so yeah, let's just go to the next one. I'll fix that before I send it out. But what you have to do is, let's just write the formula down here because it worked here. Equals Vlookup. We're going to choose our zip code. We're going to choose our table array. And remember what I said, your table array has to start where your lookup value starts. So if it starts at zip code, that you have to choose your table array from zip code to wherever your value is. And you lock that, obviously, because we're going to drag it down, hit comma, and we're going to count the column number. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we're going to choose false or 0, hit enter, and you'll see we have the formula. If we drag it down, it drags down properly, and we get the username. The point here is to just give you an idea of all the functions and limitations of VLOOKUP. This is the basics of VLOOKUP, just the very simple and how to use it. I recommend you now delete all the information if you were filling out with me and try again. And as always, I put the VLOOKUP answers at the end with the proper formulas if you need to look. And they are structured properly, so if you open it, you could see the differences between each problem. And I hope this helped you. The next video we'll go over the HLOOKUP, and then we're going to go up to more complicated VLOOKUP and HLOOKUP combinations and index and match functions to get around the VLOOKUP limitations. So watch this video until you really understand the basics of VLOOKUP. Once you've completed that, I suggest you go on to the next video. I hope this was helpful, and have a great day.